Good evening, and welcome to City Council's Public Safety Committee hearing to discuss proposed amendments to the solicitation section of the Columbus City Code. I'd like to thank Council President Harden and any of my council colleagues for joining us at tonight's hearing. For years, residents have consistently approached this council and the Division of Police asking for a resolution to the persistent problem of solicitation and human trafficking. Tonight, we'll hear from those most impacted in our community, residents from our neighborhoods, and survivors who have seen the worst of this dangerous and exploitative industry. I'm grateful for their willingness to participate tonight and interested in learning from their testimony. Following their remarks, we will go into Council's proposal to address this issue comprehensively. After my initial public hearing, it became clear that enforcement alone would not resolve this issue in our community. While I believe we must hold buyers appropriately accountable for their role in this industry, there is a desperate need for resources to support community organizations that do essential outreach work. They must be an integral part of our solution. As part of Council's effort to reimagine safety, Council President Harden has earmarked funding for the Support for Victims of Human Trafficking grant program, which will provide victims service organizations and grants ranging from $50,000 to $150,000. During tonight's hearing, we will hear from applicants on how their organizations support victims and promote safety in our communities. These one-time grants will help support the mission of these organizations to provide shelter, medical treatment, and counseling resources for victims of human trafficking. Finally, I will discuss next steps for the legislation and ongoing effort to ensure funding is available to support continued outreach. With that, I would like to invite Columbus Division of Police Deputy Chief Jennifer Knight to share some insights from the division's perspective on Columbus's sex industry. DC Knight, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Councilmember Brown. I really appreciate what Council is doing here, and I want to thank everybody for being here tonight, especially our survivors that are going to speak. I think it's really important to listen to them above anyone else. But I just want to set the stage a little bit. In Columbus, the buying and selling of sex actually presents a very visible problem in most of our neighborhoods that are really struggling already. And one of the most common complaints we receive from residents is related to the presence of prostitution. It's a visible presence in front of their homes, alleys, backyards, parking lots, playgrounds, schools. So when you're looking at the issue and how it impacts everyone in the city, a recent packed hotel operation that we just did on June 3rd and June 4th placed a few ads locally on area websites, and it was just 3 to 4 ads and over a period of 2 days. So you can get a scope of the issue. We netted about 6,733 contacts, phone calls, and text messages just over 2 days. And those contacts attempted to set up a date to buy sex with our decoys. So that tells you that this is just the tip of the iceberg of what we're dealing with when we talk about the demand side of everything. And who's impacted besides our residents? It's, the victims or the sellers are the most visible face of the problem. And I just really want to share a few catch court statistics that I share a lot. Catch courts indicated that nearly 100% of the women and men that they see in catch court are addicted. 72% grew up in poverty. 83% are linked to the mental health system already. 94% have been victims of sexual violence. 75% will attempt suicide. And the average life expectancy is 34. 93% are already mothers. So when we look at how it impacts victims out there, we know that what we've been doing isn't enough and we have to do more. So we talk about what role buyers play in perpetuating this problem in Columbus. And if COVID's taught us anything, it's the basic principles of supply and demand. If you reduce or eliminate a customer base for any type of business, the business suffocates and ceases to exist. And I think our goal in this case is to severely restrict or remove those that are buying sex in order to expose and drive away traffickers from our city. So, the average buyer, if you think about what the average buyer is that we see, we had an analysis done a few years back by City Council in conjunction with OSU, and we learned that the average buyer is a white male, college educated, 30s to 40s, who's married and has no record. So those are our average buyers, where our victims of human trafficking are much less advantaged. And so we look at this proposal and why does it consider this behavior to be exploitative? And there's actually over 400 women and men that have participated in Catch programming that have really, through their stories and their counsel, helped us understand the exploitative nature of this actual offense. The buyers are the fuel for the fire, and it's their dollars and their actions that drive traffickers to isolate, assault, exploit, and victimize an entire class of our most vulnerable citizens. So we want to increase the focus on enforcement of buyers and traffickers. It recognizes this legislation actually recognizes demand as a driving factor behind prostitution-related offenses, and codifies the reality that sellers are most often victimized twice, first by a trafficker and then by a buyer. So by instituting real penalties, but providing actual sentencing options that will address root causes that drives the behavior, we're hoping to codify our priorities and support the protection and rescue of victims through funneling some of those fines towards victims. I mean, this is the first, as far as I know, this is the first city in the state to take this step. And we are the leaders saying that this is important to us. We recognize the benefit of restorative options for the buyers, but our real goal is to diminish the customer base and pursue the actual traffickers while rescuing victims. So that kind of sets the stage for what this issue looks like in Columbus. And I think this proposal is one of the biggest things that we've done in so many years, moving towards codifying what is really important to us as citizens. Thank you, Councilmember Brown.
Where do we rank?
Go ahead, sir.
Where do we rank with regards to other communities with regards to this problem?
So a larger city has more visible signs of these issues, but this is everywhere. And so as a large city, as the capital of Ohio, we're going to visibly see more of these issues on our streets. But it's really hard to understand how pervasive this issue, trafficking, is all over the state. It is in small towns and neighborhoods. It's in big cities. It's visibly on the street, and then it's in behind closed doors as well. We rescue victims all the time that come from smaller towns and come to Columbus because that is where they believe that their client base would be, and they find more clients here. The problem is going to be more visible and bigger in Columbus. So we have to take bigger steps. We have to do something to make sure that people understand that buying sex in Columbus is not going to be accepted.
Thank you, Chief Knight. I'd like to now move forward with Assistant City Attorney Heidi Carr to introduce our next guest. Heidi?
Thank you, Councilman Brown. As Councilman Brown stated, my name is Heidi Carr. I work for the Columbus City Attorney's Office, and I had the pleasure of working with both of our next speakers. First is Mandy Matthews, and Mandy is a resource manager for Freedom a la carte. She's working directly with survivors of human trafficking, assisting them with gaining self-sufficiency once they exited from the lifestyle. Mandy's a survivor of human trafficking herself and addiction, and she's been free from human trafficking and addiction since January 8th, 2016. Mandy graduated Catch Court in 2017, and she's been a productive member of society ever since. Mandy has a 12-year-old son, a puppy named Bane, and she owns a home now. She owns a vehicle and even a Harley. Mandy is very passionate about human trafficking and helping women gain their independence in general. We also have Vanessa Perkins, who will speak after Mandy. And Vanessa's story begins in the small town of Nelsonville, Ohio, where she was sexually abused for years and began coping from a young age with drugs and alcohol. She was eventually trafficked in Columbus, where she also became involved with the criminal justice system. Her last arrest was in 2009, which afforded her the opportunity to opt into Catch Court, a specialized docket for survivors of human trafficking. After a period of time where she was focused primarily on her own healing and recovery, she began her journey of employment and independence. Vanessa worked for a couple of years at a nonprofit social enterprise called Freedom a la carte, where she was able to develop skills and would ultimately allow her to enter a different kind of workforce. She was hired by the Columbus City Attorney's Office in 2013, where she was promoted multiple times, until finally in 2018, where she accepted a position of bailiff to the Honorable Judge Paul Herbert. Instead of standing in the middle of the courtroom to check in with her Catch Court judge, Vanessa now sat right next to him, helping him carry the mission he started. Vanessa has educated thousands of people, presenting at conferences such as End the Violence Against Women International Conference, the National Association of Drug Court Professionals National Conference, the International Human Trafficking and Social Justice Conference, and most recently she presented to the Chamber of Commerce in Washington, D.C. Vanessa is most definitely a survivor leader, paving the way for other survivors behind and beside her. So first we'll have Mandy present. And Mandy, if you can introduce yourself and share your experience if you're comfortable. And if you could also talk about what life is for survivors of human trafficking or women who are being trafficked in Columbus and their impacts of being involved in this industry. If you can also, in your estimation, talk about how many sellers you believe are forced in the industry, and if you feel the buyers are responsible for causing harm to the sellers. And if you believe there needs to be more severe penalties for buyers. And if buyers are concerned about increased penalties, do you feel that this will make it more dangerous for sellers to engage in the industry? So Mandy, I will have you start.
Heidi, before we start, I also want to acknowledge Municipal Court Judge Jody Thomas, who presides over Catch Court. She's joining us this evening. Judge Thomas, thank you. And for all your hard work and what you've done in the past and your relationship with Judge Herbert, who you know I've known for a long, long time. Again, thank you for being here this evening. With that, please, Heidi, now have Ms. Matthews speak.
Hello, I'm Mandy. I'm a survivor of human trafficking, drug addiction, and I currently help women who've been where I've been and are going where I'm headed. My story in short, growing up, I was exposed to drugs, alcohol, and prostitution, sexual abuse that carried through my story, and moved out to the country for high school, met a boy, fell in love, moved back to Columbus, left that boy I fell in love with, and one of my friends moved to Columbus and met a guy down here, and he introduced us to Backpage. It wasn't force by definition, but it was definitely manipulation, persuasion into why this would be the best thing that we could do, even though I was working as a business banker at a bank here in Columbus. He convinced me otherwise, and that's what started my journey into human trafficking and prostitution. What was it like being out there, the words that come to mind are, I felt pointless, hopeless, aimless. I was an object. You know, people purchase tickets to go to Cedar Point or an amusement park to seek a thrill. I was an object like that ticket. You paid for me or not you, I'm sorry, but buyers paid for me to seek their thrill. And I was treated just like that roller coaster. You know, so to me, that's what life was like out there. The impact prostitution, human trafficking has had on me. I have a lot more long-term things. I'm still in therapy. I struggle with trust. I struggle with relationships in general, especially romantic relationships. Those are really hard. It's really hard for me to know that I'm loved and I'm not just an object that's getting taken advantage of. Which is the trust. It's a cycle and it repeats over and over in my life. For a while, my record prevented me from leading a normal life with having solicitation, loitering, and prostitution charges on my record. I was unable to, I went to Columbus State in my first year of sobriety, and I was unable to do the work study program there. They didn't want me working with their students because I had sex crimes. Even though I was a victim. I even had Judge Paul Herbert write me a letter, my probation officer at the time. It didn't matter. When I was at that place in my life, when I was ready to get my son back, I could not find somebody to rent to me. They did not want prostitutes in their neighborhoods. They did not want to rent to me because of my record. I could not find a place for the life of me. And then when I did get my son back and a family member rented a home to me, my son started playing sports and they do background checks, and I couldn't even be on the baseball field with my son because I had sex crimes. Even though I'm not a sex offender, never have been, because of prostitution, soliciting, loitering, I wasn't supposed to be on the baseball field with my son. So there's a lot of impacts it's had on me. Thank goodness the bill went through for the human trafficking expungement, and I was able to get my record expunged and eventually was able to move on from those things. But for a few years, I was not able to. Do I feel like sellers? I don't like the word sellers because to me that relates to trafficker, but are prostitutes or victims of human trafficking, are they forced into it? I don't know one woman, man, person out there that had a dream of being a prostitute when they grew up. When I was a little girl, I wanted to be a teacher, a mom, a doctor. I mean, I had all kinds of dreams, but prostitute wasn't one of them. Selling my body for sex wasn't one of them. And I think force looks different in every situation. There's the mental manipulation, there's literally physical force, there's threats. There's so many ways that we're forced into it. I don't believe that one person out there is loving life and like thinks like this is the life for me, and I can't believe I never found it before this. Absolutely 100%. I feel like people are forced into it. Are buyers causing harm? I did some research previous to speaking with you all, and I found some information that prostitution is the most dangerous profession in the US. It's 45% more dangerous than fishermen out in the ocean. Out of every 100,000 people prostituting, 129 of those people die per year. And it may be more than that. And 204 out of 100,000 is the death rate for people prostituting. Only 129 for fishermen out in the ocean. I thought that was mind-blowing. People who are prostituting are physically attacked at least one time every 30 days, whether that's sexual or just physical abuse. For me personally, 9 out of 10 of those times, it was always a buyer sexually assaulting me, physically abusing me, I could go into a million stories. 9 out of 10 times it was the buyer. I think oftentimes people think it's the pimp or the trafficker that's the abuser. They are, but the buyer is the most abusive, in my experience. Do I think that buyers should have more severe penalties? I absolutely do. Like I said, I was doing research. It dates all the way back to the 1830s. There was a prostitute by the name of Helen Jewett. She was murdered April 10th, 1836, and her murderer was a sex buyer, Richard Robinson, and he was acquitted of the murder charges. There's been the Mann Act went in effect in 1910, and that focuses solely on the seller, the prostitute, the person, the brothels, and the profits of prostitution. In the Civil War, they tried to license it and tax it. And it just goes to show our history is not focused enough on the buyer in the United States. So out of arrests made, 70% are women, 20% are male or pimps, and only 10% are buyers. I think that's astounding. I cannot believe that if 70%, 20%, that's 90%, there should also be the same number of buyers being arrested. I don't know. So I do think that they should have more severe penalties, but I also believe in restorative justice. So another study showed authorities in Washington State, I know this is in Ohio, but it reported that buyers were paying around $30,000 to $50,000 a year for sex. My addiction, I could never have spent that much per year on drugs or alcohol. So to me, that's an addiction. And to me, they need help. The people buying sex most likely have something going on, just the same way the people prostituting have things that they need to work on. And by going through Catch Court, I was able to learn a lot of that about myself. And I feel like a restorative justice program for sex buyers that's more long-term than a one-day John school, because I've also helped during those John schools. They're not effective. Do I think it would make it more dangerous for the people prostituting or being human trafficked, whichever terms you want to use? I think it could, but I'm like 50-50. Like, it could maybe cause more danger for the people out there, but it also it might make them stop, like, if they get help, because I feel like they need help. It's not, slam them and put them in jail any worse than you would a prostitute or a human trafficking person or whatever. But restorative justice, I feel like that's the answer. If there could be a model for them, like Catch Court is for survivors of human trafficking, if there was a model for buyers, I think that would be the most effective. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Matthews, for your courage and for your willingness to share your experience. It is appreciated and acknowledged. So again, thank you very much. Heidi, you have another individual to speak?
Yes, our next speaker, Councilman Brown, will be Vanessa Perkins.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me today. Can you give me a thumbs up that you can hear me okay? Thank you. I'm in this weird room. I had no plan on being still at work when I logged on here. I wanted to be in a pretty background, and now my network is poor. This is awesome. Let's see. Okay, so maybe you can't see my video, but maybe you can hear me, hopefully. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about where I come from. I'm from a small town, Nelsonville, Ohio, and I grew up in a house that domestic violence, drug addiction, chaos, drama, all that stuff was pretty normal. And I started to drink and use drugs pretty early. I was about 12 years old when I first started drinking, and that progressed over time. Like, I wasn't going hard at 12 years old, but over the years, it continued to progress, and eventually I ended up in Columbus, Ohio. And so these traffickers, they seek out people who have vulnerabilities and they prey on their vulnerabilities and like fill those gaps in people's lives so they'll feel whole again. So I have this whole history before I ever became trafficked. And this is like traffickers, they're smart. They know what they're doing. They don't just fumble around in this world and hope to land one. Like they are strategic and they're really capable of doing a lot of really horrible things and tricking us. That psychological control, I think Mandy hit on. That's how they got me. Is they used my vulnerabilities against me. I was already drug addicted. I was sexually abused as a child, and that went on for a lot of years. Secrecy was in the household. Violence was in the household. So when I left the house and I ended up here in Columbus, and this trafficker identified me basically, and then came in with a great smile and kindness and was going to offer me a place to live and place like offer me drugs, things like that. Like I was attracted to that. I needed that. And he would say things like, I love you and I've got you. I'm going to make you my wifey, things like that, that I didn't know I needed to hear. But when he said it, it just kind of like gave me that little bit of light inside me that I hadn't had for years or maybe ever. I'm not really sure. And so I'll share some things that make me really uncomfortable. Like I don't like saying he got me by saying I love you, but that's just the reality is I didn't know that love was a thing for me that could control me. So he knew that, he saw it, he saw the brokenness inside of me, so he used it against me. So he used the love and he used connection, he used housing, he used food, he used dope. He used all these things to control me, and I didn't know he was controlling me. I thought I was making these choices, and in a sense, there was some choices that I made. I'm not totally innocent. It's not that I never broke any laws or that I'm perfect. I'm not. I did a lot of bad things to a lot of good people. I had my back against the wall for a lot of years. And when you're against the wall, you do what you got to do to survive. And so I'm not here trying to paint a pretty picture of myself. I'm really not. But I can tell you, these traffickers know exactly what they're doing. And so he basically was like identifying the needs in my life and offering them to me. And I was broken just enough to where I would just follow him wherever he wanted me to go. I know there's this quote that Judge Herbert had in his presentation, and it talked about this pimp who would say, and I don't like the word pimp, but that's how it's referred to in this presentation. I think pimp is too glorified. I think human trafficker is more real. So what this guy said was, you promised her heaven and she'll follow you to hell. Excuse my language, but that is my experience and most of the people that I know's experience. And it makes me really frustrated when this happens because again, it's not just like they are out there because they are just hoping to land one. Like they know this is their livelihood. So they'll do whatever it takes to get what they need. And it's power, control, it's money, it's dominance. And it's terrifying. Like they use torturous tactics to keep us under their thumbs. Like, for example, my trafficker who I really thought loved me. Like I really thought he loved me, which I know sounds ridiculous and it feels ridiculous as I share it, but I really thought that. He held me in a basement and hit me with a hammer. Had this other person have a gun to me, made me walk across the floor with my hands on my head, telling him he didn't hurt me, even though he just hit me with a hammer in my leg and like cracked into my ribs. And like I knew that night I was not gonna live. And so those are those moments that, well, I realized I didn't really want to die because I went a lot of days wanting to not breathe anymore. And so those are those moments where I'm like, I was so close to death that I knew that I wasn't going to live. So in this life, it's like all of the good is gone. It's just such a dark world. And I don't even know what the problem is. I don't know I'm being trafficked. I don't even know those words. I believe I'm doing it to myself, which is exactly what he wants me to believe. It's a he in my case, not always a he, but in my case, it's a he. He wants me to believe it's on me and that he loves me, that we're going to get through this together. Because for one, I'm going to take the fall if the police do come in. I'm going to be the one to take the charges. I'm going to be the one going to jail, not him. I'll never roll on him. I'm not crazy. Plus, he's going to probably put money on my books. I don't know. Anyway, so, and then when I've called the police, actually, I'm sorry, I was raised, don't call the police. So my entire life, I never called the police. Even when I was being beaten, I'll never forget one of the days I picked up the phone and I dialed 911 and I came so close to hitting that third number, second one. I couldn't hit it. So I hit 911, I hung up the phone and I took the beating because it was such a core belief that we don't call the police. We don't do that. And so those are the things so all those childhood beliefs and all those things that I grew up with, like created the perfect person for these people to traffic. You know, I didn't sign up for that. I didn't know that's what was going to happen when I graduated high school and when I went down to college, and I ended up dropping out of college, and I'm already in my drug addiction and alcoholism. And I didn't know all that was going to happen. Just like Mandy said, I did not plan on being a prostitute. I did not want to be trafficked. I did not want to be raped. I don't know if you guys can relate to that, but that's part of the life. And that's something we would chalk it to, right? We would say, I mean, rape is just part of the game, you know? And I would just keep it moving. And then if I didn't bring money back to the trafficker, then I would get it again in some form or fashion. So I don't think that every single person out there is bad. I don't think every buyer out there is bad. My experience is a little different than Mandy's. Most of my abuse came from my trafficker. Quite a bit of abuse came from buyers, but there was a lot of buyers out there that were really nice. They didn't hurt me. They didn't want anything from me in a violent way. They weren't out to buy rape and dominance. They were out for their own fantasies, for their own loneliness, some of those, you know. But then there were the ones that were out there to buy rape, and they would put a number on it, and therefore I became property, and they could do whatever they wanted to me. Those are scary people, and it gets really dark in our lives as a result. And so when I came to, let me just refer, I want to make sure I hit some of these questions that I have. I do think buyers are responsible for some harm. Let's talk about severe penalties. So I definitely think the penalties need to be separate. I definitely think there's a difference between a buyer and a seller. Like, they're completely different mindsets. Most of the time, in my experience, in my own personal experience, and just about every woman I've came in contact with, we're selling out of desperation, some form or another. And the few people, I haven't talked to a lot of people who identify as sex workers. I've only talked to maybe a handful of them, but every one of them have had some kind of sexual assault in their history. And to me, that kind of puts people's back against the wall. So I don't have a lot of data or research around that. I just know so far in the 11 years that I've been out of that life, it always starts with some type of childhood abuse or abuse along the way, some type of sexual assaults, or, you know, and again, I'm not saying that's every person, but that's what it's been in my experience so far. I wish that wasn't the case. I wish there was some way to really be able to tell, because I don't want to take away women's rights. That's the last thing I want to do. We can't tell that someone is for real out there because they want to be, and because they're not. Because I'm trained, I have to convince you I want to be there. I have to convince you to not feel guilty because I need you to come back. That's my job. I have to, and it took me 2 years out of that life to even realize that I was being trafficked. I literally didn't know. I had no idea. I just thought I was stupid, no good, worthless, did what I had to do to survive, blah, blah, blah. These are the things that I believed in myself. And so I've only used over every feeling I've ever had in my entire life. So getting sober and getting out of that life and then having all these things come up is really, really difficult. Suicidal thoughts have been a part of my story. I still have PTSD. I still go to counseling, literally just canceled a counseling appointment so I could be here. But that's okay, because we got one on the books for next week. And it's been 11 years since I've been in that life, you know? So there's some residue that comes from it. And there's nothing, what I've learned is I can't turn all that off. I can't make it go away, but I can manage it today. That's as a result of these restorative justice programs. And I'm with you, Mandy. Like, I do believe there's a place for people who buy. I'm not all the way there with it. Like, I think there's some people that probably could be helped from it. I still have a hard time seeing that people who really hurt people can be restored. And I think it's just because I don't have a lot of experience. One thing I know is that I don't know, and that other people are better in that field than I am. And I hope that people do handle that field, because it's necessary. I think hitting the demand is necessary. Let me see. Is there anything? Are we going to have questions? Are we going to have questions? I want people to ask me questions. If there's not, that's okay.
Ms. Perkins, again, to you, as also to Ms. Matthews, thank you for your testimony. It does take some courage, and I'm sorry you're going to miss your appointment, Rick, and I'm sure you'll make it up. A question would be, what are some of the common misconceptions about sex work in Columbus?
That's a great question. Some common misconceptions. My microphone was not moving. Okay, there it is. I would say misconceptions would be that we're out there because we want to be out there, and that it's two consenting adults I think that's a misconception. I think most of the time there's maybe one consenting adult in that. Well, I was not quite ready for this question. So yeah, that's what I'm thinking about right now.
Yeah, I was gonna say too, another misconception, I think, especially for the buyer, is that as a seller or prostitute, human trafficking survivor, I don't know the right term to use during this, but that we want it. And that, I mean, that's part of our role. Part of our roles to play like we want it, because what we really need or want is the money that comes with it. Not, we don't want the sex. Like 99% of the time, I did not want the sex. And like Vanessa said, the two consenting adults, I do believe that if you're under the influence, you really can't give consent. And most women, all of the women I know, except for two, are addicted to substances, sober now or not, but under the influence of one substance or another or multiple while they're out there. So I don't know how they're really giving consent anyway.
A question for both of you also. Do you feel increased penalties for buyers could make it more dangerous for sellers involved in this industry, involved in this activity?
Well, in my experience, it's dangerous already. I don't know that it being like that's going to really change that, because there's a lot of people that are out there for the dominance and the control. Like they're really out there to hold me down and take whatever they want to take. And then if you don't do right by someone, it doesn't matter what the law is. They're going to do what they need to do. Like if I bring back my money, or if I demand the amount I was promised, like regardless, I'm still getting the dangerous side of it. I don't know that this is going to, it might make it worse. I don't know. I think it's already dangerous.
Can I say something?
Of course. Is that Esther?
Okay, my name is Esther,
Ms. Flores?
and
Yeah.
I'm one of the yes. I would like to say also that another misconception is that our girls are local girls. That's not really the case. Most of the women that I see are from out of town right now. There's different, spur. It depends on the season, and the fact that and both Mandy and Vanessa hit it. It's not their choice. Most of our women were coerced and were beaten and were drugged and got caught up in this life. That's been the majority of my experience, being out here for almost 6 years on the four corners of Columbus. And when it comes to the profit, aside from drugs is number one and human trafficking is number two, especially here in America. And the sad thing about it, especially working our drop-in center on the west side, these human traffickers, we have a system here that you have one person playing both roles. He's the trafficker and he's also the dope dealer. And if one goes to jail, guess what? There will be another person taking that position. So, penalizing the seller and the buyer, it's not really going to help because their minds are deranged. It's still the same part of the brain, which is the midbrain, what we call the limbic system, the emotional part. That's what they use to control the victims. What man in his right mind would be torturing a woman, beating her, and selling her? That is a learned behavior. Just like trafficking and just like the people that we have there out here performing the crimes, it's a learned behavior. And what these folks need, the buyer and the seller, they need mental health. They also need a pay to society, and they also need to be embraced with love and maybe working with other men who are homeless out in the community, who want to work, who are fathers, and maybe give back in that form of capacity. And I'll be talking about that when it's my time to speak.
Thank you, Esther. Before I move on, Judge Thomas, did you have anything you wish to add?
Hi, good evening, and thank you again for having me this evening. I just want to, I'm really here for support of Vanessa and Mandy and the courage that they had to come testify here this evening. You know, as a judge, I'm permitted to comment on potential new legislation that might come out. You know, I am a judge to support the laws that I have and enforce them. But what I can tell you, just with my background on being a public defender and now the judge for the Catch program, I see the disparities out there from the buyers and the sellers, and there needs to be a change, and there needs to be some new enforcement, because every incident that a buyer has for or on a seller affects them emotionally, physically, and I'm seeing that in the Catch program. So I just appreciate being here to support the survivors and the opportunity that we're having this conversation. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Judge Thomas. Then next, I'd like to introduce the coordinator for the Marion Village Block Watch, Ms. Dee Davenport, to share some insights into how solicitation and human trafficking impact her neighborhood. Ms. Davenport, the floor is yours. I can see how. Yes.
Thank you, Councilman Brown, for giving me this opportunity tonight to speak. As all of us know, the individuals involved in street prostitution are not bad people. They're just men and women looking to fix either an ache or an addiction. Many of us that live in Columbus have seen how the sex trade on our streets has swelled. It's not confined to back alleys or seedy motels. It's visible on our city streets Monday through Sunday, around the clock, every day of the year. It happens close to our schools, near our rec centers, and near our churches. Every quadrant of Columbus has at least one major street where johns and prostitutes are concentrated and are highly visible. To quote Ohio Attorney General Yost, the market for sex and human trafficking does not exist without buyers, and treating it like a slap on the wrist is not a useful deterrent. Simply said, the way to deter prostitution is to stem the demand. A study performed by Melissa Farley, a preeminent authority on sex trafficking, found that 85% of johns reported they would have been deterred from soliciting sex if the possibility existed that they would have been forced to be on a sex offender registry. 80% said higher fines would have been a deterrent, while 50% indicated being required to attend an educational program such as John School would deter them. Earlier, Ms. Matthews gave some statistics about the sex trade arrests in the U.S., and I just want to foot stomp that. I think it's really, really important. 70% are female prostitutes and madams. 20% are male prostitutes and pimps or traffickers. Only 10% are johns. This equates to 9 sex trade workers for every 1 customer. How is it even possible to debate the need for reform when a john receives a fine of $74 and no jail time, compared to the prostitute who receives a $1,000 fine and 6 months in jail? If the gender disparity between prostitutes and johns that's been so clearly demonstrated in Columbus was to occur in a corporate environment, everyone's heads would be rolling. It would be the Me Too movement in another way. But because it's happening to those who work and control the soft underbelly of our society, it's been very, very easy for many to look the other way. I want to thank counsel for addressing a wrong that should have been righted decades ago. It's embarrassing that only now in 2021 are we discussing the disproportionate penalties applied to prostitutes and johns. I'm going to close with this thought. A drug can be sold once. People can be sold over and over and over. The reward for johns is high. with little to no risk for them at this time in Columbus. I applaud the addition of the support for Victims of Human Trafficking grant program. I think this is a wonderful idea. And tonight, I ask council to do the right thing, incorporate this proposed amendment to city code as soon as possible. If you do this, you're going to save a lot of Mandys and a lot of Vanessas. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Davenport. In addition to your testimony given at our initial hearing from the neighbor advocates, your insights are appreciated. I have a daughter, so I have a very keen sensitivity to this issue. And it's very, very disturbing, very, very bothersome to me in a lot of different ways. I would now like to turn our attention to solutions. Our approach will incorporate a mix of enforcement directed towards buyers, diversion programs, and penalties designed to reduce recidivism for buyers, and investments in outreach services and support for sellers and victims of human trafficking. So with that being said, I'd like to reintroduce Deputy Chief Knight and Officer Ken Lawson from the Police and Community Together Division of the Division of Police for their visions for enforcement, the use of the diversion programs, and the role of our proposed legislation in accomplishing their goals. Chief Knight.
Thank you, Council Member. And Dee, thank you very much. I don't think I could have said it any better. I would like to touch on the fact that I agree with Mandy, that historically law enforcement has focused their efforts on selling as the most visible part of the problem, but demand in Columbus has created a lucrative business for traffickers, and the commodity is our most vulnerable. And so we have to look at enforcement and address demand with the same determination we have for rescuing victims, and if we're going to make a real difference in the problem. So one of the things that we identified was changing our tactics for PACT and focusing, you know, very, very strongly on the demand side of things. And we've been able to put up some really good numbers of addressing this. We want people to feel that there is the potential for them to get caught if they come to Columbus and buy sex. So on that enforcement side, our goal is to do that. We're also looking at, we partner with the Human Trafficking Task Force every single day to identify those traffickers. But so we termed this sexual exploitation for a reason, because to change the dynamic, we need to be honest about the offense and not sugarcoat it. And it also has the consequence of motivating offenders to seek out sentencing alternatives and act as a very strong deterrent. A $74 fine, like we talked about, having those mandatory minimums is extremely important. $74 is not okay. And the disparity between the consequence for the Johns and what the women are actually experiencing is there's a huge disparity, and we need to deal with that. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ken so he can talk a little bit about recidivism and some of our goals with this legislation and with the Division of Police, and how we want to make sure that buyers, if they get caught, they never get caught again. They never actually are out there on the street. We don't want that steady, ever-present stream of buyers that's fueling the sex trade right now. So those consequences are important. Ken? Hey, Ken, you're muted.
Thank you. Councilmember, thank you for for hosting this hearing and entertaining this discussion in our community. We're grateful for it. The goal for what we're trying to do is to reduce the number of men paying for sex in Columbus. That was the charge Deputy Chief Knight gave to me when we started this project. And we tried to come up with a broad-based program in order to be able to effectively reach that result. We thought that we needed to disaggregate selling from buying in our city ordinance. I have had discussions with state legislators from other cities who are very interested in what we are doing at council right now with this. We, by doing that, we've proposed increasing the minimum fine on a first-time offender. I believe it's 2018, the average fine was $74. We're proposing a minimum fine of $300, and you'll be discussing ways that we will use that fine amount, which I'm very encouraged by and look forward to. A second offense within 5 years would lead someone to 10 days minimum sentence in jail and a $550 fine. Then on that third offense within 5 years, if someone does come back a third time, which some do, then they would face 15 days in jail minimum and an $800 minimum fine. The reason that we have proposed that, when we first started this project, we wanted to figure out what was going on in the community, what were perceptions, and we wanted to be multidisciplinary in our approach. So I talked to judges, I talked to prosecutors, probation, state legislators, the Attorney General's office, counsel, nonprofits, survivors. I attended John's school. I talked to men who had been arrested. We tried to get as many perspectives on this issue as we could. And one of the groups that I talked to were sex and pornography addiction therapists. And we were coming from the position or the belief that they were counseling people who in some cases were very similar to the ones that we were arresting. And I told them what we were doing in terms of limited fine, a one-day education program. And I asked them if that would be effective for the person that they counseled. And they said it would not be. And they also said that they would need to have a significant consequence on the horizon in order to change their behavior or be motivated to. So the subsequent tiers of second offense minimums and third offense minimums are intended to fill that role. The second is that the name of the charge, sexual exploitation, we're hoping will be a deterrent up front out of the gate to keep some people from engaging in the behavior, potentially catching that charge and having it applied to whatever career field they are in. There are some individuals who simply cannot afford to have that on a criminal history in the career field where they are engaged. And so we are looking at trying to reduce recidivism through that. We also researched a therapist-led treatment program that has been beta tested in Dallas. The person who authored the program ran a John school in Dallas for 5 years. The background was sex and pornography addiction therapy. With that background, she realized that they were not meeting the needs of many of the men who were coming to it. And so she did research and then took 4 years to write this program. And it has come out off the press now and is available for us to replicate in Columbus. Her international certification group is helping us identify therapists in the community and in the state who could help us offer that program. It's 13 sessions if the entire program is engaged in. Group therapy, a 246-page workbook that they go through with the therapist leading the group. And it's designed to take them down to root causes on why they're out there and then help them develop a plan to change that behavior and help them realize why they are doing this. So our goal is not only to come in with subsequent offense penalties that would encourage them to change their behavior before they encounter those, but also to help them in a group therapy session with the help of a therapist to determine why are they out there to begin with. We also have goals of trying to provide assistance to families of sex buyers. We have a holistic approach that we want to get to and to provide our community. But the goal overarching is to reduce the number of men who are paying for sex in Columbus. We have spoken with the courts about the possibility of looking at this as a diversion program. So up front, we would be trying to drive people through the therapy program, or for those who don't have significant need, the education program may be sufficient for them. We've also talked to probation about providing supervision for them during the time that they're going through the program to make sure that there's accountability, that they're participating, that the therapist is providing reports, that they're engaged and active in the sessions. So we're trying to develop a robust approach to how we handle sex buyers in the Columbus area. And frankly, our goal is to try to match in some small regard the success that we've seen in catch court. We believe if we can have a two-track system, one where we are assisting through catch court, those who are out on the supply side or the selling side, and if we can have a second track for the buyers, where we're moving deeply into their lives and helping them understand why they're out there and trying to help them get out of it. We think we're doing probably leading work in the country in developing those two tracks through this crime. And we are already receiving calls from other states, other cities, and we've even received one from the State Department from another country who's interested in talking to us about what we're doing.
Officer Lawson.
Yes, sir.
How many repeat buyers has the factory come to your knowledge?
My understanding is over the last 3 years, I believe it was, the prosecutor's office went back and looked at it. We had arrested about 1,200 buyers, and about 24 of them were recidivists.
And did anybody do any interviews with those who have been involved in recidivism to ask why?
I don't know of anyone who's doing that work, but I would like very much to meet someone who'd be willing to.
Part of all that, and the idea of the penalties, are you in support of that concept?
I am. I have met a number of people who have gone through catch court, and looking at their experiences and discussing it with them, I believe that if we offer someone the opportunity to exit this behavior and they come back, I think sexual exploitation identifies the behavior. And I believe that that subsequent offense needs a more significant penalty than we have been giving out in our community. And I think we have a chance of getting their attention on that subsequent offense, and maybe they will take it more seriously the second time around that we are working with them. So I know there's an aversion to those types of tiered offense penalties, but I've run into very few people who do not believe that this offense calls for it.
Ken, thank you. And I know your passion for this work, and of course, DC Night. We're going to move on to the next section because I want to hear from the human service organizations that provide direct outreach to victims of human trafficking. I've asked each of them to provide a short overview of their work in the community, and I'm going to start with Esther Flores.
Thank you, Councilman Brown, advocates, friends, and leaders. Thank you for an opportunity to be the voice piece for the most vulnerable people in our community who are homeless and struggling with substance abuse disorder and are mostly trafficked. To sum up, I want you first to understand they're labeled as prostitute, but not in my definition. To me, they are destitute folks who lack love. Both Mandy and Vanessa pointed that out. They are women, youth, trans women, and men engaged in survival sex. They are someone's child and human beings. I am here today, first as a daughter of the Most High God, second as a registered nurse, thirdly as a modern day abolitionist. My name is Esther Flores. We are in a health crisis right now. It is horrible what I see every week. covering the 4 corners throughout our street outreach. Our nonprofit is a little over 6 years old. We're small, but we do mighty work. My gender pronouns are them for all those who suffer here and abroad. We have systemic oppression. Perfect example is the West Side. All systems failed. I can tell you so many stories from January to last week, but I'm not going to bore you on that. This is what's happening on the West Side. It is the epicenter of both human trafficking and drug trafficking. What we know and what we see in our drop-in center, by the way, it is the first full-time drop-in center. We operate in the peak hours, and now we are operating in the peak season. It is horrible. It's horrific, the amount of women that have come here when they're raped. It's horrible to see trans women running away from the police. We are a safe place. I have a sign on both of our doors. If they run, we lock the doors, and they find this place as a haven. What I would like to talk to you all this evening is we have recycled ineffective strategies that the leaders continue to create tragedies in our neighborhoods. And that's where they fuel human trafficking. Organizations like the Salvation Army, Adam H., the Community Shelter Board, Choices, the OJP, NEC here, they receive fathering grants, and they do not help our organization and the people that I serve. This is why. Perfect example. It's 9 o'clock. A woman gets beaten by her sugar daddy, because the sugar daddies do exist. I can't call the Choices because they don't consider the sugar daddy and the situation as a domestic violence. He's an intimate partner violator. He needs to be prosecuted. The woman needs shelter. She is ignored. I can't call the human trafficking hotline because they can't help. We, as the frontliners, become the telehelp. We are their voice piece. Most of these services, they have telehealth. Our people don't have phones. They live in abandoned houses. They live on the streets. They live on our alleys. And what we know, our data is pretty accurate because we work with them directly. We have House representatives on the West Side. They're MIA. They just don't show up. You give them a call, you email them, they don't respond. Another ineffective strategy that I keep seeing is that we have so many resources out here in Columbus, but we don't have access to them because most of our people that we work with are visible at nighttime. Where are the resources? They're not there. Another thing I would like to say is that, we have trans folks in our community. Where is Be Quick? Where are all these movements that advocate for the LGBTQA? They don't help anybody that I've observed, even in the other 3 corners, that are aged over 24. There's no transitional housing for them. That is wrong, all right? We send someone to recovery site. Guess what? They have no access to a private room because anatomically speaking, they are placed, and we're talking about a trans woman, this just happened just a few weeks ago, into a room with men. She's sexually harassed. She's about to get raped. She leaves the facility at 12:30 in the morning and ends up at our place. This is what's happening here. Lastly, congregate settings are not good for our folks. Drop-in centers work. This is why. The infamous Van Buren shelter. You got pimps, you got drug dealers, you got rapists, you got all these people there. And you know what they do? They continue to victimize people. And this is why our folks are charged with breaking and entering, because it's much more safer to be in an abando than being in Van Buren. This is the reality. What we need to understand that incarceration is not rehabilitation. For the buyer, for the seller, they need some psychological help, just like our women. What I'm appealing to you all is that I need you all to help me. I'm a clinician. It's very cost effective. We need fundings. Can we look at frontliners and even the big nonprofits who get the fathering grants? Why don't they fund us? We do the work in the nighttime. Maybe then we can show a collaborative effort so that we can see what is best in our community. One thing too is that the police, I don't trust the police. I was involved in a situation. Jennifer Knight knows about it. Carrie Hollis, you know, some of the Ken Lawson and some other folks. Policing themselves don't help. You can talk to the victims. I even had a testimonial, and IAB just sent me a letter less than 2 weeks ago that my testimonial was unfounded. This has to stop. If we really want to help the victims and we really want to create a healthy and a safe community, we need people to advocate for frontliners like myself. We need more Emily Dunlaps. We need more Tabbies that can actually help write the rules, because what's happening is the Johns get the slap on the hand, and guess what? They keep doing it over and over again. I'm done right now. I would like to just present one of my colleagues here. She has a minute or 2 minutes to speak. She's a survivor. She's a board director, and she's become a big advocate with our program. We know this works, and I believe, especially on the West Side, we need drop-in centers for men, and I believe that could be a collaborative effort, even with the Johns. You know, don't waste your money duplicating services that we already have. Have the John schools on the West Side. Help these men, because you know what? They need to be loved too. I can't stand them. I can't work with them, but they need to be helped. Men helping men.
Hello. My name is Pam Gatewood, and I appreciate your time. I am a fourth generation, both parents born and raised on the south end of Columbus. I was forced into a child prostitution ring when I was 5 on Ohio Avenue, on High Street and 104, on Miller and Kelton. The youngest I saw being victimized was 2. The oldest I saw was a 15-year-old boy. That was in 1978. And I often wonder, since we're talking about buyers, if that 15-year-old boy became a violent buyer and abuser of his wife and children and other women on the street. I'm not a professional in the men, but I do understand the women that we're talking about. They are mothers. I taught at Westmore Middle School for 15 years, and I saw the effect that human trafficking has on the children. I taught the kids of the mothers who are being trafficked. They're mad, they're hopeless, and we all can agree that this is a problem that's generational. I came to Esther's Drop-In Center and immediately saw that it was something different than OSU partial hospitalization, Mount Carmel CTAC, Net Care, Huckleberry House, Talbot Hall. I've had experience in all of those. What Esther does at her drop-in center is intentional trauma response. The women tell me they have nowhere to go. Just like she said, they walk out of Van Buren and they say, who is here to help me? They get raped. They've been held in a basement. They walk out that door and they come straight to Esther's Drop-In Center because it's the only safe place in their life. I go to the North End and do outreach there, and there is nowhere for those girls to go. The South End, where I was trafficked, there is nowhere else for those women to go. It's still happening. If you'd like to hear a little bit more about the experience that I have a podcast where I have explained very detailed description of what women and girls go through. My life would have turned out differently if in 1978, the Columbus police did not accept a bribe. Instead of stopping the child prostitution ring that I was a part of, they took a bribe. And this is what's happening in our city that's not being acknowledged. Esther is acknowledging it. She's got a different approach than what I've seen. And I hope that you all can recognize that this is a working, safe, third space that should be replicated in our city. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony as well, and thank you, Esther Flores. We have, and I have the document, your proposal is sitting right here to my left. So we'll be talking about that as time goes along. Also coming up, I have a Hannah Esterbrook from Sanctuary Night. Hannah?
Good evening. Thank you so much, Councilmember Brown and your team. And let me just say too, thank you so much to Mandy and Vanessa and also Pam, just your bravery. I hope, if nothing else, that Columbus is coming to be known as a safe place for survivors. So I just thank all of you for your words and your courage tonight. So I am the executive director of Sanctuary Night. It is another drop-in center along Sullivan Avenue on the west side of Columbus. Esther is a tough act to follow, but I'll do my best here. Drop-in centers, for those who are not familiar, are really meant to be bridges. And so we provide, and I know Esther does as well, but we're providing just basic needs. So things like food and clothing and hygiene items, a place where a woman can come and take a shower, take a nap, get some rest, and also just begin to build relationships. Sanctuary Night started, it was really birthed out of concerned neighbors. So all of us who are involved in the launch of Sanctuary Night live in Franklinton and or are survivors. And so from the beginning, we have tried to be survivor informed, survivor led, and it began as a 3-month pilot. And that was 4 years ago. And so we've just not given up, and we have in fact decided to expand significantly. So we've purchased a building last year, and we've been in a capital campaign, and are hoping to open a full-time drop-in center before the year is up. And then within a year or so, we hope to be a 24/7 drop-in center so that there is always an open door to these individuals who need, again, that bridge. If they don't know, how to get from the street into a treatment center or into a shelter, we want to be that space. So, I'll just say that I believe that this work is a slow work. We know that there are lots of reasons why women struggle to exit this lifestyle. We know because of the substance use disorder, because of stages of change. It's hard for any of us to change a behavior. That's just true. That's just true about being a human. But also we understand trauma bonding, and that these women have relationships that maybe some of us would look at and think that's not healthy, or that's toxic or harmful, and maybe it is, but it's better than nothing. And so everything that we have learned about from trauma experts suggests that that is a relationship that makes sense in the mind of a trauma survivor. And so part of what we have to do is be consistent, to show up on a regular basis, building relationship, investing our time, our energy, our resources into these women. Because as you've met survivors tonight, you can see that they're incredible women, and if we invest in them, they will also invest in our neighborhood, in our city, and beyond. So I'll just close with one final sort of example of just some of the inspiring work that we get to do. A couple weeks ago on a Monday night when we were open, we had a woman who came in who maybe had no idea what she needed when she stepped into our doors. But she let us know after we asked her a couple of questions that her birthday was just 2 days later. And so amazingly, one of our volunteers who provided food for us that night had baked a cake. And I don't know why, we never have cake, but somebody who provided food that night had baked a cake. And another volunteer a few weeks prior to this had thought to buy some birthday candles just so we're always prepared. And so we ended up lighting candles and singing happy birthday to this girl who sat down at a table with us and ate a meal with us and wept as we just sang happy birthday to her. And so we want to be the kind of space that not only helps women get help, get into treatment or get resources, but also reminds them that their lives are worth celebrating, and we see them and we love them. Thank you so much for your support and your time.
Hannah, thank you as well. Also coming up, I have Tiffany Tripp, Out of Darkness, the program. Tiffany?
Hi, thank you. Out of Darkness is the anti-sex trafficking department of Frontline Response International, and it's been serving in Columbus for the last 5.5 years. And Out of Darkness is on the front lines every day through a range of outreaches, emergency housing, and education to community members and healthcare providers. So we are able to offer women hope and encouragement and opportunity through the work of dozens of volunteers that are handing out roses and cards to women on the streets through our street outreach. They're writing letters to women in jail. They're distributing gifts to women that are dancing in clubs, and through the operation of our drop-in center on the south side of the city. And at that drop-in center, it's probably looks very similar to the other ones in so many ways. We're able to build relationships with the women. We're able to see them on Princess Night or street outreach, and then invite them in and take care of physical needs, showers, clothing, toiletries, doing laundry even. But we are able to offer programming based on dreams and identity and strength and identifying what real love is, and then inviting them in to meet with our community partners that would come in, whether it's Mount Carmel or Freedom Recovery, and inviting them to connect with these community partners for things like physical and mental health care, addiction recovery, and counseling services. And when an individual is ready and able to, she can call our 24/7 hotline for access to our fully staffed emergency safe home. So a team of volunteers would then be sent immediately to her location and safely and lovingly transport her to one of our detox partners or to the home that's located just outside of the city in the beautiful countryside. And there she'll receive crisis stabilization services and case management while preparing to enter into a long-term program to continue her journey. We are so honored to work with groups like Salvation Army and Sanctuary Night, and hand in hand with these anti-trafficking organizations that are doing tremendous work, our community resource partners, and our local task force and law enforcement agencies like PACT, able to be a resource to them and being able to provide immediate shelter and care to victims that are identified during operations. We love being able to support this demand reduction legislation that's so important. We so appreciate the work that you guys are doing, Councilmember Brown. Pardon the funding that would be available to organizations like all the ones that you see here is really important. And thank you for letting us be a part tonight.
You have to excuse my fingers aren't working as effectively as they usually do. Thank you, Tiffany. Also, we have Michelle Hannon of the Salvation Army. Ms. Hannon?
Thank you. Good evening, Councilmember Brown, and thank you so much for the opportunity to be here this evening and to share a little bit about our program. My role is I'm the Anti-Human Trafficking Director for the Salvation Army. And so what I'd love to do is tell you a little bit about the different program components that we offer. But I want to share just a tiny bit of history also about the Salvation Army. It's interesting to me and something that I learned only after we began this work here locally, that the Salvation Army, shortly after it was founded in 1865, was doing work that we would now call anti-human trafficking in London, England. So by the 1870s, they had opened a number of residential programs for survivors, and were also working around legislative advocacy. So we are continuing this tradition today in Central Ohio. As Tiffany mentioned, we have a really amazing group of partners in this community, and we have served as the manager of the Central Ohio Reach and Restore Coalition since it was founded in 2007. And today the coalition is made up of 120 organizations, and there are hundreds of individuals who are working together. We are combating human trafficking through coordinated services for survivors, public awareness, demand reduction, and legislative advocacy. So just to share a little bit about the Salvation Army's role in this network, we launched our own victim services program for human trafficking survivors in 2008. And our purpose is to assist survivors in exiting trafficking and to support their individual paths towards healing, recovery, and stability. We support survivors through a comprehensive array of services that are survivor-informed, evidence-based, and trauma-informed. We weave survivor input and leadership into all levels of our program operation. We recognize the critical role of peer support in the healing process, and we are so thankful for the survivor advocates who are part of our staff team today. They really bring amazing resources to the program that really make a difference in the lives of survivors. We also conduct regular focus groups with survivors from the community to gain insights into effective practices, to strengthen our model, to learn about gaps, etc. So just briefly about each of our program components, we have had the great privilege of managing the Central Ohio 24-hour human trafficking hotline and on-scene emergency response services now for coming on to about 14 years. We respond to over 200 hotline calls per year, and typically those are in-person responses where we assist survivors in safely exiting trafficking, stabilizing their immediate crisis, and helping them access shelter and detox and medical care. Since 2009, the Salvation Army has conducted weekly street outreach to engage with survivors who were being exploited on the streets of Columbus. And then in 2010, we launched The Well, which is a drop-in center on the Near East side of Columbus. 2019, we were able to expand to our drop-in services to our Hilltop location through the support of some very much appreciated city funding. So after a temporary halt during the COVID pandemic, we're pleased that street outreach is back in operation and the West Side Well drop-in reopens this week. So through long-term case management services, the Salvation Army provides holistic support to help survivors set and achieve goals for recovery and stability. We walk alongside survivors from the moment they exit the trafficking situation through long-term stability. We work to open doors to new opportunities and to eliminate barriers to stability. Some of the resources that are available through our case management include basic needs assistance, transportation, criminal justice system support, and connection to needed services such as trauma counseling, legal assistance, and medical care. Because many survivors struggle with accessing safe housing, we assist survivors with housing search, and we provide financial assistance to help them get established in their own apartments or homes. Each year, we serve about 300 survivors in this case management portion of our overall program. And the really amazing thing is that the majority of survivors who have this support overcome really great challenges through their own resilience and their perseverance, and they establish and maintain stability in areas such as safety, housing, access to services, income, and community support. Since 2012, our program has provided victim services for the Central Ohio Human Trafficking Task Force through a victim advocate who is co-located with the task force. And we are thankful for the opportunity to work alongside the really excellent folks at the task force to engage and support survivors identified through their operations. And more recently, the Salvation Army has worked closely with the city's PACT initiative to provide on-site victim services for survivors identified through local law enforcement operations. And we're really grateful for this partnership and for the collaborative approach, as others have mentioned and Tiffany had mentioned, in coming together to help survivors engage with services. And then just before I wrap up, I just want to really give a shout out to the amazing team at the Salvation Army, the anti-trafficking program staff team. They are not presenting here tonight, but they are a group of advocates who are truly extraordinary, and it is a real privilege to work with them. And I'm just really grateful for the work that they do on behalf of survivors. And thank you all again so much for the opportunity to share about what we do.
And thank you very much. I appreciate the work that, of course, that the Salvation Army does, and I have a history with them from many, many years in the past. So appreciate the engagement. Also, we have Courtney Schumacher in the program that She Has a Name.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Councilmember Brown, for inviting me to tell you a little bit more about She Has a Name. We've been in operation since 2010. We're on a mission as a community that's fighting human trafficking through education, through advocacy, and for caring for those impacted. And we kind of come into this with sometimes a unique model that thankfully through legislation like this is no longer so unique in caring for all those impacted. That includes the Johns. So looking at our programming just as a brief overview, we kind of operate on the bookends of human trafficking. We work a lot with prevention and education in the community to make sure that we're reducing and equipping young people so that they never have to be exploited. And then we're also caring for what we call thrivers, if we think about victims and survivors, and then thrivers who are strong men and women who are in their communities and leading in many ways. So we have 2 scholarship programs that fund dreams as well as academic pursuits. We have social support groups for these thrivers, but we also operate a John School. We've seen pretty incredible transformation happen for men that are being made aware of human trafficking for the first time, or being connected to resources for the first time, realizing that it's often their own brokenness that's leading them to consider the option of solicitation. We also have, as I mentioned, our community education program, as well as our advocacy work, bringing together organizations, connecting resources and needs, and obviously advocating on a legislative level at the state and the city as well. So thank you so much for having me.
Courtney, thank you very much. I appreciate your engagement as well. Tonight, I want to thank everybody for the vital work that you guys have done and for submitting your funding applications. And I look forward to working with you as the funding for these respective proposals. As we know, there will be an ongoing need for these services. While the Support for Victims of Human Trafficking grant program provides one-time awards, I felt it was essential to ensure earmarked funding is available to assist victim service organizations with ongoing support. This is why I'm proposing an amendment to the initially proposed legislation, which will direct 75% of the fines collected for the violation of proposed sexual exploitation provision to a newly established Victims of Human Trafficking Fund. This fund will be earmarked to support shelter, basic needs, medical treatment, and counseling services for victims of human trafficking. While it may take some time for this fund to develop, I urge and outreach organizations to engage City Council and other city departments in developing what I consider to be meaningful solutions and ways to utilize this funding. I have some public speakers this evening. That includes all the speakers that I have brought on, but I would now like to invite the public speakers that have signed up. I have 2 through my office to give testimony. Please state your name and any organizations you're affiliated with, and you have 3 minutes. I have a Miss Emily Dunlap. Ms. Dunlap, are you available?
Good evening. I am here, Councilman Brown.
Thank you for participating. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. My name is Emily Dunlap. I am a senior staff attorney with the Columbus Office of Advocating Opportunity. I testified before you in March, asking you to consider evidence that shows unequivocally how dangerous and harmful these kinds of end demand policy tactics are. You know where I stand as an attorney who for the last 6 years has represented hundreds of survivors of human trafficking in Central Ohio, advocating for their interests, protecting their rights, and removing legal obstacles in their paths. It has been a privilege to work side by side with these individuals, and AO is deeply invested in seeing human trafficking and exploitation in all of its forms eliminated. I hope you consider the pages of evidence that we have provided showing how increasing penalties for buyers does not decrease sex work and in fact makes things more dangerous and deadly for adults engaged in sex work, pushing people deeper into the margins. This evidence and data, including 13 peer-reviewed studies, runs counter to the feel-good, faulty logic that is being used to back this resolution for increased criminalization. You read many letters signed by many of our partner organizations, and you received emails and calls from constituents asking you not to do this. You did incorporate some of our suggestions for alternative solutions, but the fact remains that this ordinance will put more people, mostly women, LGBTQIA folks, and people of color in significantly increased danger for violence and death. This body continues to cite questionable evidence that lacks appropriate context or factual support. While I addressed much of these issues in my previous testimony, I would like to take a moment to call attention to a gap in data that we're working to fill. We've been told over and over that the people who this law will target are white, educated men with disposable income who need jail to deter them. This conclusion, which was cited in the FAQ document provided by council, comes from self-reported demographic information gathered from paid subscriptions to an international erotic review website, not data gathered at the point of arrest and for sex workers who are generally not street-based. However, we started digging in to gather Franklin County case data for the last 3 large sting operations. We are finding that who gets arrested for buying sex in Central Ohio looks quite different. This is preliminary, but when comparing defendants, the racial makeup is pretty consistent in that we are arresting a disproportionate number of men of color. 85% of men arrested and charged with soliciting during Operation Autumn Hope were non-white. And additionally, from what we can tell, between 30 and 53% of men arrested for soliciting obtain their own legal representation, with up to 35% of those arrested for soliciting in Autumn Hope and around 45% in Operation 614 qualifying for a public defender or being declared unable to pay their court costs and fees. As we continue collecting data, we expect these trends to bear out what we anticipated, which is actually a disproportionate impact on marginalized and indigenous communities. I was reading recently about our incoming chief of police calling for rebuilding trust in our community to decrease inequality and violence in our city. This law will have the opposite effect. More prostitution stings, arrests, and incarceration will not build more trust or reduce violence in our city. Ask leaders like Vanessa and Esther why women on the street don't call the cops when they get beat by their traffickers and put out for not bringing back enough money, or why they don't call the cops when the violent Johns with nothing to lose are the ones that they encounter. Increased criminalization is not solving a problem. It is simply changing what it looks like. Abusers will be able to keep adapting unless we truly focus on preventative work and reduce the ways we make and keep people vulnerable to trafficking and exploitation. I appreciate Columbus City Council's time in unpacking the many intersecting issues at play in this ordinance and taking the time to listen to our concerns. I would not be here if I did not know at my core that this is a dangerous policy that will harm people that I care about, who are currently engaged in sex work and being trafficked in our city. I hope you hear me and all the other voices trying to explain some difficult and important truths to you here today.
Thank you, Ms. Dunlap. I do hear you. As you know, you and I have had conversations. Also, this evening, I have Rachel Wenning, W-E-N-N-I-N-G. Please state your name and any organization you represent, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Rachel Wenning, and I'm an attorney and a Hilltop resident. Soliciting a prostitute is already a crime in Columbus. It's a crime which is very rarely enforced. And in my neighborhood, the Hilltop, from my front porch, I see cars pick up women working on Sullivan on a daily, if not hourly basis. Police could perform traffic stops on these vehicles, but they do not. In 5 years here, I've never seen one of these vehicles stopped after picking someone up. Based on this fact alone, increases in penalties for purchasers of sex contained in this proposed amendment will do nothing to decrease visible sex work in my neighborhood. There are already laws on the books which are not enforced. What increased criminalization will likely accomplish is to give manipulators and abusers further power over people performing sex work. And this includes police officers who use criminal charges as leverage to rape and abuse sex workers. We know that this is an ongoing problem in our police force, from Andrew Mitchell to Randall Mayhew, who is still employed as an officer, to other lesser-known officers still on our streets, sexually abusing women who are in extremely vulnerable situations. Increased penalties, even for purchasers, gives more power to people who seek to harm and manipulate sex workers. And obviously, because these laws are not being enforced, there will not be any increase in funding from the penalties, even if money were a justification for criminalizing people, which it is not. Part of this discussion focuses on funding. While I appreciate the rundown of services which are provided by our local organizations for sex workers, that is frankly irrelevant to the increased criminalization of buyers. Funding for assistance for sex workers should be coming from our existing city budget through social services like medical care, including drug treatment and mental health counseling, housing, job services, childcare, and so on. These are the services that help sex workers leave sex work when that is what they want. Sex workers need community support and access to services that, quite frankly, should already be available to everyone in the city. It is really unfathomable to me that such a regressive and antiquated type of law is being considered in a city that tries to call itself progressive. Progressive is decriminalizing sex work. Progressive is direct services informed and led by sex workers. If we want to have gender equality in our laws, we should decriminalize buying and selling, and that would give us total equity in the law. Thank you.
Ms. Winning, thank you for your testimony as well this evening. It's interesting that there's always multiple sides to an issue, and it's important to hear all sides. I want to thank tonight's presenters, Deputy Chief Knight, Mrs. Carr, Mrs. Matthews, Mrs. Perkins, Mrs. Davenport, Officer Lawson. I'd also like to thank, I didn't acknowledge him, but Deputy Chief Robert Stewart, Deputy Safety Director, I'm sorry, Robert, from the Department of Public Safety for attending this evening's hearing. And I want to thank my staff, Grant Ames and Denise Foster, and the city clerk staff, especially Angela Burks, for helping facilitate this evening and facilitate this hearing. And finally, thank the community for your participation and engagement in this proposed legislation. My goal must be to find an equitable solution to health, safety, and the quality of life concerns raised by our residents. Moreover, I strive to eradicate human trafficking from our community as best as I can in a legislative capacity, while ensuring victims are compassionately supported. I believe the proposed legislation is a start to accomplishing that goal, but it will take work from all of us to find a solution. Following today's public hearing, I will work with my colleagues to evaluate the support for victims of human trafficking proposals that have been submitted. Following that process, we will place legislation to amend Section 2307 on June 28th at City Council agenda for first reading. Again, I want to thank everyone for participating, and that concludes tonight's public hearing. Thank you all. Good night.